What's up, Outliers? Welcome to Performance Bites, where bite sized insights into complex subjects in health and performance. This episode, we're going to talk about barefoot shoes. And I'm actually quite surprised I haven't talked about it before because I'm a huge advocate for barefoot shoes, being barefoot, and gaining control over your feet because a lot of the times, a lot of our issues that stream upwards into our knees or hips and our back can actually be coming from our feet, believe it or not. So, when we look at barefoot shoes, we look at it as an opportunity to create better splay, more strength, and more overall control over our feet. And most of the times, if we're looking at a standard shoe, and this could be a running shoe, this could be a um, daily shoe, anything across the board, it's not very common that these shoes have what is called a foot shape, and our feet actually have a certain shape and splay to them. And it's unfortunate because when we put them into shoes that are overly tight and don't allow for that splay to occur, where our toes are actually spreading apart when we make contact with the ground, kind of like a squish outwards, the feet will adapt, and the body is super good at adapting. So we'll see things like the toes starting to round inwards more into a point rather than being out and flat and wide. And that, of course, can lead to certain things like bunions or even little nodules on the outside of the feet when the little baby toe starts to point inwards. So that shape is not a true shape to what our foot anatomy is supposed to be. And barefoot shoes, their whole idea is to allow for you to feel the ground and also use the musculature, the joints, and all that stuff in your feet so that you're absorbing impacts properly and actually alleviating some of that impact that is going up into the knees, hips, and back and stuff like that. Now, I will say that there's a time and place for normal shoes, and when I say normal shoes, these shoes that are not barefoot shaped, I would definitely, as somebody that races motocross, when I put my motocross boots on, that boot is specifically designed to protect my ankle, to protect my feet when I'm out racing and stuff like that. So, when I'm in that for 20 minutes at a time, that's not really a big deal because 'cause I'm not living in those shoes for 9 hours a day. Same for a basketball shoe, soccer cleats, rock climbing shoes, all this stuff. Time and place is very important, and especially knowing that they're not the shoe that you're necessarily living in. Meanwhile, a barefoot shoe is something that you might be in all day if you're working, something that you might use at the gym. But I will say that there is a bit of a learning phase with barefoot shoes. So I can't remember exactly what year. I believe it was in 2020. I got my first pair of Vivo Barefoot shoes and I started to transition into a barefoot shoe. And the biggest thing that you don't realize when you're transitioning, and I say this as more of like informational tips to anybody that is looking to transition, is most of our shoes have a drop to them, and what that drop means is essentially the heel height of the shoe to the toe height. So it's not uncommon for that to be 6 to 12 millimeters, maybe even sometimes higher than that. And so that's essentially putting your heel higher than your toe. And though that sounds very small, because like 6 millimeters is itty bitty, it actually in the tissue of, our Achilles tendon to our gastrocnemius and our soleus being those muscles in the posterior side of our lower leg, we're actually creating shortness in them just ever so slightly over time. And of course, if you're wearing even more heel high shoes, that's going to be even greater. But even 6 millimeters can go quite far, especially even for somebody like myself. Like I wore Reebok Nanos and stuff like that for my workout shoes, which were pretty good. I'm not quite sure what the drop were on them, but those shoes were really great for exercise. But when I was running in more narrow shoes, something like a Nike and an On, which worked great at the time. But I also didn't realize why I was having issues elsewhere and how actually creating better health in my feet helped to alleviate a lot of those issues. Kind of silly to say. So during my transition, when I first started wearing the barefoot shoes, I would just like anything else, I would basically do dosage of training in them, and when I say training, I mean walking. I would simply put them on for the walks that we would go on, 20, 30 minutes at a time until I started to adapt, and the one thing I really did notice in the early weeks of transitioning to a barefoot shoe was soreness and tightness in my calves, and that makes a lot of sense after what I said about that heel drop position in most shoes. But I also noticed how much I strike through my heel because when we have padding in our shoes, we can basically slam our heel into the ground when we're walking and not really recognize that we're doing it. But when you get into a minimal barefoot shoe, there's not a lot of padding there. So you start to recognize when you're jamming that heel into the ground so much more. And so you kinda dose it over time, and it's not a big thing to kind of go run instantly in barefoot shoes. Some people will run in them, and Vivo actually just came out with a new barefoot runner, but that's a whole other topic, and if that's something that you're wanting to do, please speak to somebody about that because it's not gonna be as simple as hopping out of your Nikes and into these barefoot runners and going for a run. It might feel good at first, but if you don't dose it appropriately, you could be opening up the door for stress fractures and stuff like that. So, time and place for everything, of course. Now, to make all of this make more sense, we need to kind of understand the anatomy of our feet a little bit more. So, to break it down, essentially, we have 206 bones in the body, right? So, that's from the toes to the top of my head, 206 bones. In each one of our feet, we have 26 bones. So that is 52 bones. That is a quarter of our total bones exist in our feet. Now, our hands have 27 in them each. So you kind of get the idea like the articulation that we have in our hands and the dexterity that we do have in our hands is pretty impressive, but the anatomy to our hands to our feet is fairly similar, but the length of the bones and the organization is slightly different, of course. So in our feet, we have the 26 bones. Now, that is going to be our 7 tarsals, 5 metatarsals, and 14 phalanges. And when I say phalanges, I'm talking about your toes. So each one of your toes has 3 bones in it, except for your big toe has 2 bones, so 14. And then the metatarsals are going to be basically the long bones from your toes up towards your more midfoot ankle, and there's 5 of those. And then we have what we would call in our hands, we call them the cuboid bones because 'cause they're kinda cubey. We have those as well in our feet, and those are our tarsals, which those names and stuff don't really matter too much, but if you're curious what they are, the talus, the calcaneus, the navicular, cuboid, and 3 cuneiform bones, essentially, which is going to be medial, intermediate, and lateral. Of course, yeah, I have to look at those to remember them. But with that being said, it's very important to recognize the complexity of those 26 bones in the foot because there's also 33 joints and over 100 muscle, tendon, ligament complexes that are going on in the feet. So it kind of makes a lot of sense when I go back to the beginning when I was talking about putting our feet into shoes that don't allow a natural splay. We're really kind of suffocating those bones, those joints, and not allowing for the articulation of them to really work. Now, of course, the dexterity isn't quite like the hands, but they should be capable of moving around and also absorbing impact and splaying outwards. So that's kind of the biggest thing when I want to, get somebody into barefoot shoes is I'm like, "Hey, I can see that your ankle instability is not good, and we're having a hard time with where the knees going, what the hips are doing, and stuff like that. Let's just simply take your shoes off and look at a couple of movements. Let's do some walking lunges. Let's do some single leg RDLs. And if I can recognize that the feet are basically like a singular block and they aren't articulating, it makes a lot of sense why that ankle would start to be wiggle wobbling a little bit more, why the knee would have more instability left to right and stuff like that. Because you have 33 joints down there that should be helping to basically make fine motor movements to help increase the stability at the feet. But when the feet are blocked up, and they're not moving the way they're supposed to, it stems upwards as I was speaking about. So, transitioning to the barefoot shoe, you could simply just do more exercises barefoot as long as you're being careful and smart in the gym, not to drop stuff on your feet. Some gyms don't allow you to take your shoes off, which is where barefoot shoes can be very helpful. I have no affiliation whatsoever with Vivo. They're just a brand that I have personally used for many years. And I think they're, as far as like functionality and style of a barefoot shoe, they've come a long way because I think a lot of people still think when you say a barefoot shoe, you think of like the Vibram like five fingers, which like had the separate like individual toes in it and stuff like that. And you don't want to wear those out and about. I totally understand. They're not very good looking and nobody wants to really see that look on somebody out at dinner or something like that. But thankfully Vivo has really kind of come to make some really great shoes. And if you're listening to this and not watching, I have one of the Vivo sneakers right here and honestly it looks as good as any other skate shoe. Obviously it flexes and has more bend and also is, zero drop, which is the whole idea, but also super wide toe box so that you get that splay in the feet. And you're basically just going to feel the ground more naturally. And you don't have to do anything special to strengthen your feet when you get into barefoot shoes or walk around barefoot. You just have to let them be and they're going to start to move around a little bit more. Now, if you're an individual that wants to improve your feet and you're not able to get into barefoot shoes, just try and stay out of your daily shoes as much as possible. I also recommend using a lacrosse ball and, even if you're sitting at a desk all day, lacrosse ball on the floor and rolling your arch out with it, rolling out the balls of your feet with it and stuff like that. And that really can go a long way to helping create more dexterity in those joints. And then also things like toe spacers are super helpful. So yoga toes, I know that sounds maybe a little bit weird, maybe a little bit uncomfortable for some people at first because those muscles are going to get pretty cranky when you try and take them out of their blocked up state with the toe spacers. But even wearing those 10 minutes, advancing on 15, 20 a day when you're at home to try and counter, totally think that is a helpful thing that you could do. Also, things like toe socks, which maybe sounds a little silly, but Injinji makes a wonderful toe sock. I use them exclusively for my socks and reduces blisters, especially for running and hiking and stuff like that. So, yeah, I just think there's a lot to be said about a barefoot shoe and the advantages of it. Now, like I said, there's the caveat if you're doing a specific sport, you have a specific shoe, a cleat, or a boot or something. That's one thing because you're not living in them, like I said. But I definitely think that a lot of people could benefit from exercising in the gym with a barefoot shoe. And if you're going to go run, maybe use a shoe that has a wider toe box, like Ultra is known to have a wider toe box. Once again, no affiliation, but that is a close to barefoot shoe that you're gonna still have the padding so you can go run and not bruise up your feet, increase your chances of stress fractures and stuff like that. But you at least get that splay, that natural splay that I've been speaking about in your feet, in your toes to allow you to feel the ground better and also use those muscles that are existing down in the feet. Sponsor of today's podcast is Intake Breathing. Intake Breathing has revolutionized nasal dilation through their rigid nasal strips that actually are magnetic and come with tabs that you put on your nose that will allow it to stick and dilate your nostrils. So, increasing nasal breathing is going to obviously increase nasal flow, bringing in more oxygen and also increasing nitric oxide into the system so that it can enhance your overall performance. If you want to try intake, head over to intakebreathing.com/outlier athlete and use code outlier athlete for 15% off your order. Now, I know a lot of people, when they hear a barefoot shoe, they get a little bit shy about the idea of wearing a barefoot shoe because they don't want to be, you know, too weird or, have people kind of look at them funny. But that's the thing is the way that the styles have been coming along with the barefoot shoes, they're getting so much better. You can hardly tell they're barefoot anymore. But I would really encourage people to investigate more into it for the sake of the health of their feet. But also, if, like I said, you're dealing with a knee issue or you're dealing with hip issues, lower back issues, changing your gait and fixing it so that you're actually walking properly is going to help so much with how that pressure is distributed throughout your body on each step. And that's going to correlate over to things like running when you are in different shoes and stuff like that with a little more padding. And ultimately, just get you out of pain a little bit quicker because just one of those things, like, if the issue of your pain is actually because your feet are blocked up and your hip hurts and you're constantly trying to do mobility, PT, whatever for your hip, and then all of a sudden, it gets a little bit better, but then it goes backwards, stuff like that. That's very common. I've heard it on multiple occasions, and you're basically just putting a Band-Aid on an issue rather than going to the source of the issue, which could potentially be the feet. And I have a really good massage therapist friend who has helped individuals really get rid of back issues simply by going to more of a zero drop shoe and learning how to move properly. So it's not just like this hoo ha bullshit. It really is a way that our bodies are meant to move. If you look at certain shoes that just have huge padding on them and stuff. And I just had this conversation last night with my wife. I was like, we're talking about padded shoes and how it just keeps on getting thicker, thicker, thicker. And it's almost as if when we first started getting more padding in our shoes, people are like, oh, that feels better. But then the shoe wasn't padded enough anymore, then people's feet continue to hurt and plantar fasciitis and all this stuff. So there's like, put more padding. And now you got, Hokas that are like 3 inches, which that's an exaggeration, but they're huge. It's absolutely crazy to look at a running shoe have so much padding in it, and it's like you're running on a marshmallow. And especially if somebody's taking that shoe and then they're going into the gym and doing lifts on it, that's absolutely terrible. You're not making contact with the ground to actually stimulate the right musculature and stuff like that. You might as well just be standing on a pillow while lifting weights. And also learning how to really activate the right musculature is going to be the thing that helps keep you out of discomfort ultimately at the end of the day. So it's a bit of a rant at the same time. So this performance bite, though informational, it's also a way for me to be like, hey, like I really encourage people to take a look at some of these barefoot shoes and make a transition slowly but surely into them and really be open to the idea of what it could do for your overall health of your feet, the health of your body in general. And if you have any questions about how to transition, what would look best for you, please comment below. I'd be happy to answer. Happy to help anyone out in this transition from more of that tight shoe to a barefoot shoe and to improve their foot health. So please reach out, but also please like, subscribe, and all that good stuff. Let's keep this going and growing the page and helping Outlier get more information out to people like you. So, thanks so much for watching, and I will catch you in the next one.